right, welcome to Audiovisual Media Radio. I know you did TV in the first semester. I hope you learned a few things out of that and it wasn't too hectic. I'm a firm believer in interaction. This, for you, doesn't really fall within the scope of what you are studying. I'd like to start by asking both of you what it is you want to do when you're done with this degree.
Hi, Charita. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Thanks for asking.
So I already work in the radio space.
Oh,
Yeah. So for me, when I did this degree, I just needed to just get an in-depth learning into just media as a whole, not just the focus on radio. But I am looking forward to using the skills, obviously, that I'm learning here to implement in my everyday life. Like, for example, we did a project management module last year, I think. And that came in very handy when we moved to a new building and we moved into using a new system for on air. So that sort of like helped in that respect, because then I implemented some of the tools that I learned on project management in real life. So I think for me, that's what I'm looking at, and just to broaden my knowledge on basically just the media industry as a whole.
okay, great. So you say you're in media and it sounds like you're on air or working in a studio. Can I ask what you do?
So I'm operations.
Mhm.
Operations, but I work very closely with presenters, technical producers, and other stakeholders in the business. So the marketing department, the events department, the sales department. Yeah.
Okay, which station?
With 702.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're going to know some of the stuff that we're going to be chatting about. That's great.
Yeah.
Wonderful station to be at as well. Jessica, and you?
Sorry, guys, there's an alarm going off. I'm sorry if you can hear it.
No, we can't. But...
Okay. So I'm in the public relations space. I wanted to do this course to get into the more senior level in my career. So I'm in the junior level now. And then, so I work with a lot of radio stations, but I know nothing about the radio space. I work with 702, like Dineo. I work with your Kaya FM, your Channel Africa. So I work with a lot of radio. So that's my perspective of radio, not so much the technical stuff about radio. But yeah, that's me.
Right. Okay, that helps me a lot to just get a broader understanding. So both of you have a sense of radio. Well, Dineo a bit more probably, but yeah. Okay, so when we get started now, just so that you understand, this module is it's pretty much an overview of a lot of different things within the sector, okay? Just so that you can have a broad understanding of radio, of the scope in South Africa versus the rest of the world. This is the breakdown of what we shall be doing, okay? So firstly, this is my email address. If you need to get a hold of me, you need to have the Next Level Radio textbook. There is another textbook that we will be working with called Managing Radio, but you don't have to buy that textbook. I will send you the pages that we will look at, because that textbook is focusing more on the UK specifically, where Next Level Radio focuses on South Africa, the radio as a radio station, or as a radio sector rather. So what are we doing? We are doing the radio landscape, okay, first and foremost. So that's what we're busy with today. So you can look at Next Level Radio Chapter 1, and you can also go and look here at the broadcast bridge. Then we're going to go into legalities and guidelines, which I find very fascinating, especially at the moment with everything that's happening in media around the world and the strikes in America, for instance. So it's going to be interesting, and we're going to look at the film and publications industry and what they've implemented last year, for instance. Then we're going to look at commercial station management, so what it entails from all the different sides, the different types of managers, their roles, station managers specifically, the roles, what it takes, etc. Then we're going to look at content. So from a storytelling point of view, you can see we're not focusing too much on that. It's more to give you an overview of what is expected of you. Then buying, selling, and executing airtime. And then lastly, managing audio-visual radio programming content. So when I say audio-visual media, what does that mean to you?
So audio visual. So it would encompass two things. So the audio side and visual, things that you can see, like digital, like picture and all of that.
So it could be, for instance, a radio station streaming the content live that they're doing in the studio. It could be a podcast that also has a visual element to it. There's a lot of different things that it can be, but in essence, what it is it's combining audio and visual together, right? So why is this growing so much? There are three ways that you learn, let's say as a student in this case. You will learn either visually or you will learn more by seeing things or kinesthetic, aka touching and using and doing. So the whole idea is to try and incorporate these three ways when we are producing anything or putting anything out there in media. Why? Because that's a much easier way for me to know that you are actually taking in what I'm saying, okay? Because everyone has one of these focuses. Some people need all three. So focusing this way, we can make sure that we have a lot more people who listen to us, okay, who start listening to us. So today we're looking at page 2 to 12 in your textbook, and additional reading at the back of your textbook. You can find links to a lot of texts and URLs, etc. So you can go and have a look there to read case studies by Johnson, Ullman, Lowe, and Alexander, and then also read, when you have time, David Lloyd's chapter, Radio's Future, How Might Your Medium Change? So that comes from his book, How to Make Great Radio, Tips and Techniques. Okay, so if we start out, our industry, the radio industry, is divided into three different sectors or services. What are they? What type of radio stations do we get?
PBS, commercial, and community.
Yeah, definitely. So those three, okay? So public service, commercial, and community. So if we start looking at these, what would you say is the biggest difference between the three? So let's start by, why does commercial radio exist? One simple reason.
Is it because maybe the radio is less serious compared to, like, Metro FM is a more commercial radio, I think.
They are commercial, yes. Unfortunately, I wish that was the case, but commercial radio stations exist purely to make profits for their shareholders. Okay, PTY limited companies, they are there to make money. It's a business. At the end of the day, the shareholders want to see how much dividends they are getting back. Right, that's why it's such a competitive industry and such a difficult industry to be in as well, and stressful. Then community radio stations. So under community, you also get campus radio. So both of these fall within that. Sorry, I'm just quickly looking at what Grant just sent me. He's my boss, so I have to reply at BMH. Right. Anyway, so like I was saying, campus radio falls under the community sector when it comes to licensing. So why would campus fall under community, form part of community licensing?
They service a community, so they are quite a community radio station, not in the, so for example, like VOW FM is classified as a community, but it serves within the campus.
Yes.
And then so that's regarded as a community. And then Alex FM would then serve a much larger audience, like the Alexandra area, which is also considered obviously a community.
100%. So as much as it's a campus radio station, at the end of the day, you are there to serve your campus community. So you all have something in common. The same as, like you said, Alex FM, like Joe's FM, like Mum's FM, etc., etc. They are all there to serve their community. So it's kind of like a voice for the voiceless. We speak about things that are happening in our community on this radio station. Okay. Then you get PBS, public broadcasters, public service broadcasters. Why do they exist?
So I think, so PBS does what community radio station does, but at a larger scale. So they are there to become, what do I say? So it's it's informative radio, and they're there to serve the larger audience, the larger community. So they don't necessarily, so they're not necessarily placed to make money or to make any kind of profit like commercial radio stations are. So they are in a less competitive environment than commercial radio stations, but they serve sort of like the same purpose as community, but on a broader and a larger scale.
Okay, so I'm glad you mentioned not there to make a profit, because that's the biggest thing about community radio stations as well. They are not allowed to be a PTY limited. They're not allowed to make money at the end of the day that goes into a shareholder's pocket. Okay, it has to technically go back into the community, be used for upskilling, be used to teach, be used to whatever, buy new equipment, etc. But there shouldn't be anyone who's pocketing additional funding. Shouldn't. Public broadcaster. So in South Africa, we have a constitution that says everyone has the right to access media, okay? Which means what? I can't have radio only in one language. So we have the 11 ALS stations. Even though in South Africa we have 12 languages, we can't really use sign language as a radio station. So we have 11 official African language stations. But then we also have cultural radio stations, like XKFM is the Khoisan radio station, like Lotus FM is the Islamic radio station. Okay, so they are not there to make money. Yes, that is correct. They are there to serve the public, the South African public as a whole. So the big difference between community radio station and the public broadcaster is that as a community radio station, I speak only to my community, right? I speak about all the issues and things that is happening in my community. If I am a public broadcaster radio station, whether it be cultural or language, I serve everyone else speaking my language or everyone else from my culture. It's not just about my community, because my community can spread across the whole South Africa, right? So we refer to it then as it's a radio station specifically for you, for your language, or specifically aimed at your cultural needs, to make sure that everyone in South Africa has a station they can listen to without being excluded. Right. So do you understand that big difference between community and PBS?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. So let's backtrack a bit and we start talking about where does radio come from? How did it start? So radio in South Africa started quite a bit before TV, in existence since the early 1900s, specifically 1923, which isn't far behind. I think it's about 2 years behind radio starting in the UK, right? So we're quite on par there. The first licenses were issued in Joburg, then in Cape Town, then in Durban. Started with the South African Railways. So this, by the way, you don't need to know in detail. It's just an overview for you. So South African Railways firstly, and then it went to the Cape and Peninsula Broadcasting Association in Cape Town in September 1924, and then Durban in December 1924. And in 1927, they formed the African Broadcasting Corporation. So the idea behind this is that instead of the government taking ownership of these 3 stations, they were the responsibility of the ABC. So I want to pause here quickly because there's a misconception in South Africa that the SABC is owned by the government. The SABC is not owned by the government. Yes, there is one shareholder signature on there because as a PBS, you have to have a signature from your government on there, but it's not owned and regulated by the government. The government is not allowed to tell the SABC what they are allowed and not allowed to broadcast. Hence why a couple of years back, there was that big drama with like 5 people of the SABC board being fired because they were working with the government. Okay, so that's not allowed. We'll get to that when we talk about deregulation, but just an understanding. So the SABC relies a lot on things like your TV licenses. Okay, but I'm jumping the gun there now. So the ABC was started. Great vision, wonderful. Unfortunately, the ABC itself only lasted for 9 years, and then the company was dissolved, didn't make enough money financially, so just couldn't continue with it. Then what happened was, in its place, the South African Broadcasting Corporation. So the SABC was formed under Act number 22 of our law. Okay. So the SABC bought all 3 ABC licenses from them, and they began to broadcast officially as the SABC in 1936. So it's been quite a while that it's been ongoing. In 1943, so 7 years later, the SABC launched its first African language services in isiZulu, isiXhosa, and Sesotho. Do you know what these stations are today?
Is it Ukhozi FM, Lesedi FM? What's the other one? Dineo.
Umhlobo wenene is the
Yeah.
Xhosa. Is the Xhosa
Yeah.
one.
There we go. Okay. And do you know what's interesting about these stations? I'm going to show you stats a little bit later. They fall under the highest listenership radio stations in South Africa today still. Okay. So this is factually incorrect. It is now 21, but so the SABC broadcasts through 21 publicly owned radio stations. What's added is XKFM and True FM. True FM being a youth radio station. So TV only arrived in 1976, meaning that for over 50 years, we relied solely on radio stations for our news, our entertainment, education, right? Big thing. Today, 90% of South Africans still do listen to radio. The average time spent listening, that's what TSL is, it's more than 4 hours a day, and 45% of listeners listen to about 20 hours of radio weekly. Why do you think it's so high?
What the listenership in the radio stations that you had mentioned?
No, radio overall in South Africa.
Why is the, sorry, can you just repeat that so that I can just...
Why is it that the listenership in South Africa for radio is still so high, that the fact that still we have 90% of South Africans listening to radio, and people spend more than 45% of listeners listen to an average of 20 hours of radio per week?
So I think, firstly, I think the majority of it is radio is easy to access compared to other information platforms. And I think there's also a trustability, if there's such a word. there's a trust that people build between the people that they listen to on radio to give them the information that that they need. And radio generally is a companion to a lot of people, so you can have your radio in the background while doing other things. And a lot of people in South Africa obviously rely on radio as a source of information. And just as I stated earlier, that it's much more easily accessible. You know, you don't need to jump through hoops and hurdles to have a radio.
Yeah. If we break it down, in essence, it comes down to socioeconomic status.
Yeah.
In South Africa, we know that our rural areas are still are exceptionally big. They are really big, right? And people can't afford TVs. A radio is cheap to buy, and it's easy to have numerous radio stations that you can listen to. Okay, so we do have a high percentage of listening, because you can see as you look at the socioeconomic status of people that people with a job will listen more to radio in the mornings and the afternoons because they're driving. But we've also seen a recent surge in daytime radio as well, like between 9 and 1, due to people driving to meetings and things. But it's important to know that as much as we have such a high radio listenership, it's a lot of it is due to the economic standing of South Africans as a whole as well. Okay, but regardless, radio is a very prolific and a powerful medium of communication, regardless of economic status or geography. Like you just mentioned, radio is a companion. Radio is the only medium that has been made for passive listening, aka for having it on in the background while I'm doing other things. Okay, that's the way radio literally is. Whereas things like podcasts are made for active listening. I have to listen to this thing to be able to take it in. I don't need to do that with radio. And radio speaks to me one-on-one. It's the only medium that talks to me one-on-one, that can do that also. Okay. So let's look at the evolution then of radio. So here we started. Oh, wait, before we carry on. So we saw a very interesting phenomenon. When TV came out, obviously it spiked, everyone wanted one. And even 15 years ago, people were saying things like, radio is not going to last. It's null and void. It's going to go down. TV is way ahead of it, going to grow much bigger than it is, blah, blah, blah. But what did radio do? It innovated, it changed with the times. And interestingly enough, radio and social media go together hand in hand. Okay, it works extremely well together. Why? If I go onto whatever social media platform I am using, is it made for mass media or is it made for me specifically or you specifically? It's made for you, right? You have different ads than I will have. You have different content that I will have because you have been Googling different things than I have. So it's pulling different things out for you than it is for me. And where radio comes in here is that it also speaks to you as a person. And we create content in such a way that it can speak to a big group of people, or rather, no, it can relate to a big group of people and still speak to you, okay, as an individual. So social media actually really helped bring people closer, because now I can talk to my favorite celeb. I can DM them if I really wanted to, and people respond on radio station pages, etc. So we have about 350 licensed radio stations in South Africa, and that excludes internet-based stations. Why does it exclude internet-based radio stations? Because internet-based radio stations currently do not need an ICASA license. I'm saying currently because I know they're looking into it, and at some point I can see things are going to happen. But anyway, so for now they don't need one. Of these, 24 are privately owned commercial radio stations run by business owners to deliver a profit. 702. And then 21 of these are owned by the SABC. Of those 21, how many are commercial? How many commercial radio stations do the SABC have?
Sure. I don't know. I'm gonna take a wild guess. Probably 19 of them, or just under.
Okay, so the SABC only has 3 commercial radio stations.
Really?
Really?
Metro FM, 5 FM, and Good Hope FM in Cape Town.
Okay.
Okay. Sure.
So that's it. 3 commercial radio stations. Then they have 11 African language radio stations. Then they have a talk radio station, and they have a youth radio station separate from the commercial station, and then they have culturally based radio stations. Okay. Why? Because again, public broadcasters are there to broadcast to the public, the majority of the public. And as a commercial radio station, I'm not doing that. I'm talking to specific people. So they are there to talk to everyone, which means they have specific guidelines, which we'll look at a little bit later. So SABC, very much dependent on advertising revenue, even though their only shareholder is the Minister of Communications. Okay, they have a signature on there from the Minister of Communications. But like I say, not a state broadcaster. Only 3% of the SABC's funding comes from government, right? They rely a lot on people paying their TV licenses, which people don't like doing, which means there are always issues with funding. And then they rely a lot more on advertising because they need to get in that money that people are not willing to pay, right? So I'm not sure if you knew this, but your TV license fee that you are paying annually for around 300 Rand or whatever it is, not only goes to the SABC TV stations, it also goes to all SABC radio stations. So that funding is really important. The UK runs on a similar kind of platform where they also have the BBC, which is their public broadcaster, and they also get TV license funding to help fund this thing, in essence. So, like we said, we have these commercial radio stations, then we have these public broadcaster stations, then we have these community radio stations. And these are, unfortunately, self-funded. Many of them are non-profit organizations. They are widely managed and staffed by volunteers. The only place that they really can get funding from these days is the MDDA, okay, the Media Diversity Agency in South Africa. And I know this time around, the MDDA just closed their applications, and they were only looking for applications from like the Free State, I think it was Northwest and Eastern Cape. So if you were from, let's say, Gauteng or Cape Town, you couldn't even apply for funding for next year, or well, for the following year. So it's quite difficult to run a community radio station if you don't have the correct management, which a lot of them don't have because they don't have the experience to start with. So they're just kind of trying and failing and trying and failing until they can try and get it correct. Who do you think is the biggest community radio station in South Africa?
Is it UJFM? Is it?
UJ wishes. It's Josie, if ever.
Oh.
Okay. Josie is by far the biggest community radio station in South Africa. It's bigger than a couple of commercial radio stations.
Wow.
Yeah. So how is it that we start this whole process? How do I get my radio station on air? There are different ways for the different stations. You have the way that community radio stations need to do it, and then you have the way that commercial radio stations need to do it. So commercial radio stations tend to have they have a 10-year license, okay? Community radio stations have anything between a 3-year or a 5-year license, and then they need to renew it. Otherwise, they're seen as non-compliant, and ICASA can shut them down. A couple of years back, ICASA caused a big row because they actually did that. There were quite a few radio stations, UCT Radio, for instance, being among them, who were non-compliant, and ICASA did shut them down. But they gave them a couple of months to rectify it, and then they went back on air. So all these community radio stations each have a license officer, to which on a monthly basis they need to submit their programming logs, so all the music that they played, as well as they have to send through a week's worth of audio, so actual audio logs, and their advertising logs, okay, every single month, to make so that ICASA can make sure that you are actually being compliant on the whole. So what does ICASA stand for? It stands for the Independent Communications Authority of South Africa. Why are they there? They are there because the South African government decided that we need bodies to regulate these things, and ICASA is one of these bodies on the one side, and then we have a body called the NAB, the National Association of Broadcasters, who are there to help the broadcasters, and then we have the BCCSA, the Broadcasting Complaints Commission of South Africa. Okay, so ICASA, firstly, what do? They are mandated to issue licenses to ensure universal service and access, monitor the industry, hear disputes, plan, control, manage the frequency spectrum, and protect customers from unfair business practice. So anything that has to do with communications has an ICASA sticker. The back of your mouse has an ICASA sticker. Computers have an ICASA sticker. Cell phones have an ICASA sticker. Okay, TVs, radios, obviously. Okay, everything that falls under communications has an ICASA sticker on it. ICASA looks after everything communications that has to do with communications. So firstly, they issue licenses. So we get two types of licenses. The first is what we call a spectrum license. So my broadcast spectrum is my footprint. Okay, so it tells me how far I am allowed to distribute, how far my megahertz waves are allowed to go. Okay, the footprint I'm broadcasting in. The other one is what we call a class license. My class license is my name. It tells me the type of radio station that I am in terms of music. We're going to talk about that in the future. what type of content am I broadcasting? How much news do I do per day? How many minutes in essence? How many minutes of sport do I do? Do I do educational programming? Do I do religious programming, etc., etc.? That is all in my class license. So as a community radio station, you would apply for said license. Let's say in the middle of Pretoria, we think there's a lack of I don't know, a Zulu radio station, a community radio station, because it's too Afrikaans. So we go to them and we say, listen, we have this group of people, this population who are not currently, who don't currently have a radio station that they can listen to, a community station, because there's nothing around them that they can understand, etc. So I'm applying for a spectrum license in this specific area and a class license in this specific area. Unfortunately for us, ICASA is it's like two different silos. They don't talk to each other. So you deal with the one and they say something, then you deal with the other one and they say something, and you hope that both of them say yes at the end of the day. But we are sitting in a time in South Africa that since 2017, there's been a moratorium on new licenses. So no one can apply for a new radio station license, community radio station license, because there's no frequencies available, okay? Our FM, aka our waves, frequencies are full. If you see it, it's actually quite scary when you look at the waves on the spectrum. Because remember, we also use frequency for other things. For instance, SOS signals, submarines, there's all these other services, the Coast Guards, etc. All these other people who also need space to be able to make use of frequencies. So what have we done? We've put a moratorium on it. So fine, you could always go and create an AM radio station if you really wanted to. So AM stands for amplitude modulation versus FM, which is frequency modulation. So this is more scientific, okay, science related, not really stuff you need to know in detail, but it's interesting. So AM sounds like a tin can, or like you're sitting in a toilet cubicle talking. So you know that very hollow, tinny sound? That's what AM sounds like. So we only have one AM music radio station in South Africa called Magic 828 AM in the Western Cape. And it works for them because they play old school songs. They don't play the re-releases of said songs. So it doesn't make such a big difference in terms of what you're hearing, because the quality of the tracks weren't that great to begin with, okay? So anything mono works well. So why would you want a radio station on AM? Because AM is bendable, okay? AM can literally go around the world if, like me, you believe the world is round indeed and not flat. Whereas FM is not bendable. FM can't bend at all, it's straight, okay? So if I have a radio station and my frequency, my footprint has like a mountain in the middle, it means that I need to have a transmitter going to the bottom of said mountain, then one going up said mountain, and then one going down said mountain, and one going on again, okay? Get my drift. So not bendable at all. But crisp, clear sounds, not influenced by things like rain, wind, topography, so buildings, etc., whereas AM is influenced by that, okay? So that's the main reason we don't really create radio stations in AM, because we actually want people to listen to our radio station. And today, people are so used to this wonderful sounds that come out, this clear sound, that you're going to go, oh, something is wrong when you hear that, okay? So one of the issues also that have been coming in with the FM signals are that the waves have started crossing at certain intersections because people obviously want to increase their footprint. I want more people to listen to me. So I'm like, sneakily, I just, increase my transmitter's strength a little bit, meaning I can broadcast a bit further, which means now I'm infringing on someone else's frequency. Have you ever driven and heard two radio stations broadcasting over each other?
Yes, I actually have experienced that.
That means someone is doing something they're not supposed to be doing. Because if you adhere to your frequency broadcast spectrum footprint, it shouldn't bleed like that into another radio station. Okay, so that's like one of the reasons ICASA exists, for me to go, sir, they are on our side of the playground. Like, move them away from our side of the playground. Okay, so it's one of the kind of issues that they will clear up for you. So part of the disputes that they would listen to, and make sure that there's no unfair business practices happening, etc. So what is the big difference then with the BCCSA versus ICASA in terms of hearing disputes?
So the BCCSA is a body that monitors the content that gets broadcast on radio. So they're sort of like the principle of the radio. So if radio stations don't adhere to their license, or if they've got or if they take to air content that somebody deems offensive or is not suitable for children or for whatever purpose, then they can take them to the BCSA to lodge a complaint. And then if the radio station is found to be guilty, then they do pay a fine to the BCCSA.
So in essence, what it comes down to is, are you infringing on my constitutional rights in any way? Okay, so when everything started, the radio station started and ICASA started, the NAB was formed, the National Association of Broadcasters, who looks after all the broadcasters, not only radio, okay, but the broadcasters' rights. So they are like the principle of the media in South Africa. Then we had this lack. We needed a principle now for the community as well, for the people, because if I can complain as a radio station, surely the listeners should be able to complain as well if they hear something they don't like. And this body was formed, okay? Also independent body, to make sure that I do have a right to stand up if I don't like something, or there's hate speech, or whatever it might be, so that I can go to them and exactly that, go and complain about the radio station or what they stand for, or a presenter who's been saying things they shouldn't be saying. Okay. Oh, hold on before I carry on. So there is, with this happening, right, we don't really get new stations. Fine, I can get a one-day ICASA license if I really want to do something, but can't get anything else. So it was a very interesting phenomenon for me when there was one community radio station who got a commercial radio station license without the commercial station license being bid. So normally what happens with commercial licenses is it's open for bidding. So people all pitch in and saying why they should get it, blah, 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 costs a lot of money, etc. And then they decide on one person to get it. But have you ever heard of Classic FM?
Yes.
Yes.
Do you know it doesn't exist anymore?
Yes, I do.
Okay. So Classic FM couldn't make money anymore. It wasn't financially viable anymore to have this pure classic radio station. So what happened? Hot FM has always been a community radio station since the day they launched. But since the day they launched, we all knew they were actually meant to be a commercial radio station, because if you look at everything from the station management to all the presenters and the way it's run, it's very commercial. Okay. So what happened? Hot took over, aka bought over, Classic FM's license. So there was a point last year where Hot FM, if you look at the BRC rands, had was on there twice, once under community and once under commercial, okay, before they went over to whatever their frequency is now, when they still had their old frequency. So you could see both of them there, because for a while they were community radio and commercial at the same time. They've switched over now. They are only commercial now. In my 20 years that I've been in media, I've never heard of something like that. It was the first time I've seen it. I find it exceptionally interesting that you could do that, because I didn't know that you even could do it. But anyway, so Hot is now a commercial radio station, and Classic FM doesn't exist anymore. Just something interesting there. So what are we doing in South Africa, seeing as we do not have these any frequencies available anymore? Not sure if you're aware, but last year, beginning of last year, we implemented what is called digital terrestrial television. Okay, so government subsidized set-top boxes. It was in print and we advertised it, and it was very cheap for people who couldn't afford it. Why? Because we no longer wanted you to try and use an antenna and those bunny ears, but rather to use a set-top box so that everyone in South Africa now has access to this. Great. So that has been done. But keep in mind, a lot more people in South Africa have radios than does TVs, okay? Way more radios out there than there are TVs out there. So what we are waiting on, and what we have been waiting on since a long, long time ago, I feel like I can start singing that song now, because I've known about this for at least 8-9 years now. Anyway, that they have been looking at bringing in what we call DAB, digital audio broadcasting. So Danelle, you should know what DAB is, because you guys are on there. Ever heard of it? Oh, no. What am I doing? Why is sharing paused?
No, I haven't. I have not heard of it.
Okay. So DAB, in essence, will be wonderful once we can do it. Reason being, where you are now, let's say on, I don't know, 92.6, you are taking up that frequency space. There's only one radio station, right? If you go and use digital audio broadcasting, you can use that same space for 50 radio stations. Okay, that's how small it is. So once we go through this lecture, I'm going to start talking to you about in detail about what DAB is. But it's, in essence, it'll change the face of radio. We can have, because currently community radio is very monopolized in South Africa, right? Because if you look at the UK versus us, they have double the amount of commercial radio stations that we do for, let's say, the same amount of people. So it'll be good for us in sense of competition and just making sure we're still up there. But what are we waiting on? We are waiting on the government to get funding to be able to subsidize a set-top box for everyone. Why? Because it is my constitutional right to be able to have access to the media. So for me to do this, it means the government, if I can't afford it, needs to be able to provide me with one. Okay, so we are waiting. But currently, there are some stations that are running on both DAB and FM at the same time, which is not an issue at all. And they've bought into it. So they've actually paid money to be part of the digital audio broadcasting. So, you know those little smart speakers, let's say JBL Bluetooth speaker thing with like a little screen on it where you can either listen to radio or you can play music from it?
Yes.
Yes.
That is DAB. That thing is a DAB device, okay? So all the radio stations that you can listen to on there forms part of DAB. So your metros, your 947, 702, 5FM, and quite a few other stations anyway are already part of this thing. So people have bought into it, okay, and have spent on this thing. We are now just waiting to see what is going to happen, whether this thing is actually going to be implemented. So one of two things can happen. There's been countries where it's been implemented and it's worked really well. Great, they switched off FM. Then there's been countries that have used it, decided they don't need it, switched that off and gone back to pure FM. Okay. So it's quite interesting to see how it differs around the world. So, however, whether a station is owned by the government or not, South African radio stations all operate on commercial business principles and operational practices. What does it mean? It means I have a product that I sell, whether the product is a chair or whether the product is content, airtime, in other words. It's my product that I am selling at the end of the day, right? So you can sell that content within your specific footprint to advertisers, or you can sell it to overseas partners if they are interested. Like at a point, what's the station's name? Not Cape Talk. Oh, KFM. Like at a point, KFM had Ryan Seacrest Top 40. They bought that content. They didn't have Ryan Seacrest live every single week on air. Ryan Seacrest packaged this Top 40 show and sold it to 30 plus radio stations. Okay, so you can also do that. So like I said, it's a business. A radio station is a business, pure and simple, which is why you're learning about it. We need customers, aka my listeners, but at the same time, I need clients, aka advertisers. I can't have a radio station if I don't have listeners and if I don't have advertisers, okay? Because if I have no one to broadcast to, I won't get advertisers. And if I don't get advertisers, I won't have anyone to broadcast to because I don't have money to pay anyone. It's like that chicken and egg situation. And then in the case of state-owned enterprises, I'll have stakeholders. And then we have shareholders in the case of the PTY Limited companies in South Africa. So let's talk about commercial radio stations. Can you name 5 commercial radio stations?
Uh, 702, 947, Metro, Kaya, and 5FM.
Okay, great. So you mentioned different types of radio stations there now. Who are our talk radio stations in South Africa?
So talk station 702, SAFM. I don't know if Power is a talk station. I'm really confused about their positioning.
It is a talk radio station.
So Power, okay, we'll include Power FM. So do you just want commercial talk or any talk radio stations in South Africa?
There are only 4 talk radio stations in South Africa, and you've mentioned 3 of them.
What is it? Is it Jacaranda?
No, Jack is not. Cape Talk.
You already mentioned Cape Talk.
Oh, did I?
94.7.
No, 947 is not a talk radio station. So I said 702 Power, SAFM.
You said 5FM.
No, you're missing your own one now. Okay, so it's 702, SAFM, Cape Talk,
and Power.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, so Cape Talk, no, I didn't include Cape Talk when I did. Did I include it?
No.
Possible.
Yeah.
So those 4, yes, are the only 4 talk radio stations in South Africa. So now I have a question for you. What do you think Radio 2000 would fall under? Because a lot of people have this inclination that they are talk radio.
Is it so they are part of PBAs, right? Because they're not commercial.
Yeah.
I don't know. So I would classify it. I don't know. So I think it's a bit of both, because they do have like music elements and then they've got talk elements. So they're not strictly like talk, and they're also not just strictly a music radio station.
So they have a music license. Okay. They fall under what do you call it? Adult contemporary.
Yeah.
In terms of their music license, but with that they have talk elements. Okay. But they still, in terms of licensing, are known as a music radio station. If we want to define it, we can say music/sport. We can also say that they are the English ALS station, African language station. Okay.
Okay.
So Radio 2000 is always an interesting one. If we continue talking about a commercial radio station, we have said that they exist to deliver a profit the same way that any other business would, which is why they are so stringent and so strict on the presenter ratings, etc., and the way that they run these things, because universal business principles do apply. Stations are all fighting together for time with their listeners. So they must have a clearly defined offering designed to attract and sustain their audiences, which is why you have your normal programming, and then you have what is called block programming, where we want to talk to our P2 listener, our secondary listener, to try and get them away from the other radio stations. Because radio is this highly competitive space. In the whole South Africa, if you were to count everyone who's in the radio industry and put them together, you'll get around an average of 12,000 people, okay, which is not a lot if you think about how many people we are. So radio stations will definitely very carefully manage their resources to deliver the best possible products that they can, and will aim to develop new competencies and new revenue streams at all times to make a profit. So if we go back to what happened in South Africa, South Africa went through a time of deregulation and liberalization. So what does that mean? What does it mean if I am deregulating? So opposite of regulating. I'm taking away some of the rules and laws that I've imposed on you, that I told you that you have to adhere to. So what I did now is I said, you know what? I don't think this is necessary anymore. I'm going to take them away. Why would they do this? First and foremost, because would you trust a media outlet if you knew that they formed part of, for instance, the government? They're owned by a government entity. Will you trust what they say?
I think today, no. I don't know. In 2023, no, yeah.
That's a fact, okay? We're going to talk about a place where even the Catholic Church still has a say on what, or still owns radio stations. I would not trust what gets released there at all, okay? I'll be like, hey, propaganda, yo. So we need to have a free and fair and independent media body for it to have credibility. I need to know no one is standing behind you, pulling your strings, telling you what to say, what you can and can't say. So hence deregulation, so that we could establish a more credible image of the media industry in the eyes and minds of people, of citizens, right? Then we went through a period of liberalization. So here, the government relaxed a couple of their laws and policies to reflect this more free market approach to commerce and trade. How did they do that? They sold off some of their stations, okay? So they distributed the types of ownership of different radio stations more widely across different companies and associations. So other people could now also buy into this, and then we could finally have competition, different types of stations, wider variety for people to be able to listen to, etc. And it began in 1996. So why does this say 2006? This should be yeah, like that. Anyway, it began in 1996 officially, where the SABC let go of 6 radio stations that was owned and operated by them, namely 947, Jacaranda FM, East Coast Radio, KFM, OFM, and Algo FM. Something interesting about these 6 radio stations. 947 and KFM, owned by the same company. Jacaranda and East Coast Radio, owned by the same company. OFM and Algoa, same company. Okay. So in essence, what happened is they sold off these stations to 3 massive companies, corporates, right? To start bringing in different types of radio stations of different formats. So this process of privatization and liberalization meant that these stations could now be bought by groups of people with financial investors funding them to be owned and operated as commercial entities, which is what happened. So that was 1996. And during 1997, 8 more commercial radio station licenses were granted that the SABC gave away to broadcast in Joburg, Cape Town, and Durban. And these were geared towards formats that would attract a Black audience at the time, as this majority group was heavily underrepresented, except for the 3 African language stations in the media landscape. So some of these we know today as, firstly, Heart FM. So Heart FM used to be P4 radio about 21 years ago. They used to be known as P4 radio, actually, up until a couple of years later, because I used to work for P4 radio, which was like a jazz radio station before they became Heart FM, and they were way more politically inclined, I can say. Then next one, Kai FM, YFM, Cape Talk, Gagazi FM, and Classic, which no longer exists. Okay. So something interesting about Gagazi FM. Gagazi FM is, wait, before I tell you that, what is the largest commercial radio station in South Africa?
I'm gonna guess Ukhozi FM.
Yes.
No. Yes. Oh, yeah.
Okay, by far. Oh, hold on. I am lying to you. Ukhozi FM is the biggest radio station in South Africa. Yes, they are number 1. But who's the biggest commercial radio station? Because Ukhozi is the isiZulu station for ALS. ASL. ALS. Yeah. That. So who would you think commercially?
Could it be Metro FM?
It is Metro.
No.
So who do you think is second?
Is it Dinewa's radio station? 702?
Unfortunately not. It's Gagazi FM.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So Gagazi is second, very interestingly. And do you know how many people I meet who don't even know what Gagazi is?
Yes, they don't.
Mm-hmm. And they think Gagazi for some reason is in PE. Then I'm like, Durban? Is that in PE?
Yeah.
It's very interesting if you see, like, in terms of how big it is, with still this perception of what people have of it. Anyway, so Why did we go through this whole deregulation and liberalization process in South Africa? So the reasoning behind this commercialization of once public-owned radio stations and granting them this new licenses is based on two aspects. Firstly, the radio choices available to the public are now increased, creating a more democratic landscape that satisfies a more variety of tastes. Okay, a lot more different people can listen to the kind of music and radio that they like. Then a wider variety of choices generate competition amongst stations, which is great because this in essence drives the economy and it improves our content quality overall, as more stations will develop specific positions in the market by refining their content to attract specific audiences. Okay, so it was a good thing for us to do. So let's look at the three major contenders within the South African commercial radio space. This is the one where 702 falls in, Prime Media. Prime Media, we all know, big. They own lots of outside billboards. They own 702, Cape Talk, 947, and KFM. Then we have Kagiso Media. What does Kagiso Media own?
Kaya, Jacaranda. Can't remember the others.
East Coast Radio.
East Coast.
Also on that, they don't have 100% shareholding of Kaya.
Oh, really?
They are not the only person.
Or are they part shareholders? Are they not majority?
I wonder if I still have their licensing document here. Hold on, I'm going to tell you now. Before I lie to you. Let's see, because somewhere they do say the percentages. So Kagiso Media has investments they don't own. So they own Jacaranda and East Coast Radio. Okay, but they have investments in Kaya, Gagazi, OFM, and Heart FM.
Oh.
Because I think it's African Media Entertainment actually that has the majority. African Media Entertainment. Let's see. I always fact check my things because you never know. Like any day, these things can change.
They change in a blink of an eye.
They really do, which makes it very interesting. Shareholder information. Don't care about that. The portfolio. There we go. Yeah, so AME has majority shareholding of OFM and they own Algoa. So who? Hold on. KFM. As there is someone there. I can't see who else it is now. Oh, wait, no. It's moved. Right. I'm going to have to find, I want to find the annual compliance. Oh, I think I just found 2017. Okay, this will tell us who it is. So KFM, oh no, this was only until 2018. But as of 2018, let me actually quickly show you this. Or as of before 2018, actually, rather. It looked like so. This is how they were split up. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Okay, so obviously Kagiso bought over someone's shares here. So someone is no longer in here because this was up until 2018.
Oh.
Yeah, so this here you can see they have 10 years up until 2018. So obviously there's currently a new one, which I will get a hold of so that I can show you that. I don't have it now, but that's why I say these things, I always double and triple check because these things do change. And they change often. And you still think one thing, suddenly it's another. Okay. Anyway, so let's go back to my slides. So anyway, like I was saying, it's Kagiso Media, Prime Media, and then AME, OFM, and Algo FM. And then apart from them, it's the SABC with their 3 commercially designed radio stations, which are 5FM, Metro FM, and Good Hope FM. So if we look at public radio now, public radio overall receives over 70% of their funding from advertising. Like I said, 3% from the government and whatever we get in terms of people paying their TV licenses. But they have a very specific mandate and very specific licensing agreements through ICASA because they are there for the public, so public broadcasters. So this is just to show you an example. Format obviously means the content, aka what they do on air. So for instance, some of their conditions might be that they have to do 150 minutes of drama per week, so half an hour each day. That they have to do 240 to 300 minutes of educational content per week because we are educating. They need to do religious content. I don't agree with that one, but anyway, it's still there depending on the station. And then that they have to do sport coverage depending on the station. So some of them, these are not all of their stations, but some of them are Ikwekwezi, Ligwala Gwala. I'm going to get back to Lotus now. Lesedi, Mongana, Lonene, Motsweding, Pala Pala, Radio 2000, Aris here, SAFM and Tubela FM. Okay, so ALS stations, SAFM Talk Station, Lotus FM. Why do you think Lotus FM was created?
I'm not sure. I don't
Who are their audience?
cater to hey.
Who are their audience? Do you what do you know about Lotus?
Isn't it yeah.
Sorry, Jesse, can go.
No, I was saying, isn't they target audience Indian people, I think. Right?
So Islamic.
Yeah, Islamic, yeah, sorry. Yeah, so.
That is correct.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is cultural. A cultural radio station, all right? Not so much anything else. So do you remember a couple of years back when Mr. Claudio Motsweding decided overnight that we need to go, all SABC radio stations needs to go 90% local music?
Yep, interesting.
What do you think happened to a station like Lotus FM?
So if you
we don't have 90% Hindu music in South Africa.
Exactly. I think they got greatly impacted by that.
They did. Massively. Their listenership dropped overnight, like plummeted. Okay. So people don't always realize the bigger impact, and it's easy to go, yes, it's great, it's so good that like we're going 90% local. The ALS stations, it didn't impact them at all. right? Because they are already playing the music in their languages, which is locally produced. But the likes of 5FM, 5FM is a youth top 40 radio station, CHR, okay, commercial hit radio. They were impacted. Metro FM was impacted less, but still impacted a bit, okay? So there was still an impact for a lot of these radio stations, but it's important to know that, or to take note of the cultural stations and how big a damage that 90% did to those specific stations also. So you can't make a decision like that overnight across the board and think it's going to be okay.
Yeah. And just
yes.
a question. So then in the case of ICASA, since they regulate licenses, would this not have infringed on the kind of license that was issued to the SABC for their various radio stations? So if you just wake up and say 90% local, is it not, so does their license not stipulate that there needs to be obviously like balanced content, which will obviously include international music and all of the rest? Or did that not even have an impact, or did ICASA not have a say in the decision that Claudie had made?
So they did, and the radio stations went to ICASA for clarity on this 90%, and ICASA supported the new quotas. So ICASA stood behind it because a couple of months before that, they were looking at the local music quotas, and they increased the PBS stations specifically to over 60%, to deliver rather 60% local music. And the commercial radio stations needed to reach 35% local music a couple of months before that. So this was already something that was being looked at, not in this majority, but, in a smaller scale. And ICASA also warned that the licensees that did not meet the requirements of this quota would be liable for a fine up to 5 million, like literally 5 million rand, or 10% of their annual turnover. But ICASA did say that as much as they are for this new 90% quota thing, they also said they didn't anticipate that it would be an overnight decision by Claudie. So they also removed themselves from the problem, like after this whole thing kind of started blowing up. And they kind of just they started backing off because they said the SABC was giving them more than 90%, so more than they wanted. But like I said, the problem here again was that stations like, for instance, Lotus FM was not taken into consideration. As much as ICASA was standing behind it, it did massive cultural damage to these radio stations. So obviously, as we know, what ended up happening is that they retracted that. So ICASA did go back to saying, okay, guys, not working, can't work on all these stations. So we need to go relook at what we are doing at the moment. So that's a long answer to your question.
That's very interesting. Okay.
See, radio is interesting. All right. So what other stations are there then? So then we have, for instance, True FM, which is isiXhosa and English, okay, youth radio station. Then there is XKFM, which is like, I don't know how to pronounce it, something like Ku and Kwe. So it's a Khoisan radio station, okay. More again, culturally as well. So you can see all these different cultural radio stations that we have along with these language-based radio stations, again, because it's for the whole public, the whole South Africa. If we look at a couple of formats, here it says full service / cultural, right? But out of these, I would not necessarily call, I would call majority of these ALS stations, African language stations. African language, Ikwekwezi, Ligwalagwala. Lotus, I would call cultural. The Sedi, Mongana Lonene, Motsweding, Palapala, I would call African language. Radio 2000, here you can see, they see them as sports / music. Again, they have a music radio station license, but they do play a lot of sport. SAFM, scrap that music part. SAFM is a talk radio station. Talk radio station, that's what they're known for. True FM, like I said, youth, and XK I would also put under cultural. So it's just so that you can see how different places would name the different types of radio station. And in essence, there's nothing wrong with this. It just depends on where you're looking and how they would say it, as long as you understand the difference between ALS stations, for instance, and the cultural radio stations. So the one is there for your language, which also then encompasses your culture. The other one is there for your culture, which then encompasses your music, sometimes your language as well, depending. Whereas my community radio station is there for my community, my specific community, wherever I'm broadcasting, like Alex in Alexandria, like Josie FM in Soweto, for instance. Okay. So before we carry on there, I want to show you, where is this thing? Ds. I want to show you Ds. So you should both know that the methodology in South Africa has changed, right? To Ipsos, yes, and that we are now have a format where we are contacted telephonically called CATI. So instead of doing diaries and in-person meetings, we now do calls, and there's other metrics that we now derive using digital programs. And there's a scripted questionnaire, which takes 20 to 25 minutes to administer. All interviews are recorded, and they're taking the listenership for over 300 stations. They take your week sample, but they also take your yesterday sample, and they're using random digit dialing for this thing. Okay. So that's the new way that we now get our RAMs. So what I want to show you is nothing to do with all this jazz, la, 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 la. All that stuff you can go and look at if you want. They are my numbers. Okay, so top 20 commercial radio stations. Number one, Ukhozi FM, 7.597 million listeners. Okay. Metro FM, 4.535 million. Then, this is what I want you to have a look at. So the first one, public broadcaster. Then we have one commercial, but also SABC. Then we have a public broadcaster, a public broadcaster, a public broadcaster. Oops, I skipped a public broadcaster there. A public broadcaster before we get the next commercial radio station. So it's very obvious where South Africa's majority still listen. And it's two, with the exception of Metro, it's radio stations in their own language, All Radio 2000, which has an older listenership, lots of sport also. And then you have Gagazi, which it's actually gone down, by the way, in figures. And then we have Jacaranda, thirdly. So Jacaranda and 947 always tend to fluctuate which one is above the other. But Jacaranda, then we have another PBS, then East Coast Radio, which is our next commercial, another PBS, then KFM, and then 947, which is really interesting because this has never happened, that KFM is bigger than 947, which could mean a couple of things. Then 5FM, then YFM, and then Heart. Okay, so these are the top 20, what they call commercial radio stations, but you understand PBS versus commercial here. We look at community, Josie by far, but they also have dropped. They used to be on 600,000. Again, I have to say that this quarter tends to be lower every single year. Yeah, don't ask me why. Anyway, so we'll see what the next one says. Then Izwi Mzansi, then Voice of the Cape, Teta, Zibonele, Nongoma, Ikora, Vembe, My King, Alfred Nzo Community Radio Station, Kwezi, then Radio Tygerberg, which is a Christian radio station, CCFM, Christian radio station, etc., etc. Okay. Number 20, interestingly enough, Afrikaans radio station. So that's our top 20 community stations then. So if you look at just a little bit of Ikozi here, oh, I don't want to show you this actually. This is just the, oh wait, yes, quarter hour listenership. So quarter hour listenership is interesting because here you can see the amounts and the times that the quarter hour listenership goes up, right? So right here is before 6. So it spikes at about what, 5:30-ish until about 6:15, right? And then we have a spike again in the afternoons here around 3:30. On the weekends, completely different story. Versus then if you now look at Metro FM, their biggest spike is here, okay, in the afternoon, like 5. Versus in the mornings. PBS, commercial. Okay, very interesting when you start delving into these things and you see the differences between them. Okay, that's all I wanted to show you on there. So now we've spoken a lot about PBS and about commercial radio stations. If you think about community radio now in terms of everything we've spoken about with the other 2 types of stations, what do you think their issues are? What do you think the biggest issues are of community radio stations before I put the slides back on? Oh, that one.
I think the one for me that immediately I think stands out would be funding, or yeah, I think would be funding. And I also think reach, because then obviously the more, if they do have enough funding, then they're able to afford a little bit more, like the better licensing and the better, you know, like reach. But without that, they're quite limited to what they have. Because I do know, so one of my colleagues used to work at VOW FM, and she had mentioned that, so they were self-distributing the signal. So they didn't have the likes of Centec distributing their signal for them, which then would allow them obviously a wider reach, but they had to distribute and use means that they have to reach their community. So I think that's what a lot of community radio station struggle from, because if there is no funding, then there's a potential that they might close down, you know?
Yeah. So community radio stations have serious challenges, firstly with regards to weaker transmitters, exactly like you just said. So if I am up against someone with a transmitter that is that big and has that big an audience, and I am here with my transmitter that only does that, I have a way smaller footprint. And what does that mean? That means I have way less listeners, which unfortunately for the agencies in South Africa make a big difference. So less listeners means less spending due to less advertising, which means I get less money, right? And I need to compete against the likes of SABC and the commercial radio stations. It's difficult. It's not an easy thing to do. They depend on funding. And like I just said, the MDDA can't afford to give everyone funding. They don't give everyone funding because they also need to fund print and they need to fund TV along with radio stations. So you might have 5 stations getting funding for the year. So lots and lots of financial challenges. But on the other side of that, community radio stations are able to cultivate really loyal listenerships, okay? Similar to the African language stations. People are loyal to their stations. If you grow up in a specific community and you're listening to that specific community radio station, you are loyal to them. Think about schools. There were always school rivalries, right? With like people in a school next to your school, or rivalry universities, whatever. It's things that we kind of cling on to. And people tend to stay loyal to their community radio stations as well. Because community radio stations target a specific community, specific types of people, specific culture groups, or other groups of people. And when it comes to community radio stations, we have very diverse. We're very similar in terms of Australia in that way, that we have all these very diverse community radio stations from all these different languages, to High FM, which is a Jewish radio station, to CCFM, which is this Christian radio station, to all these other radio stations, etc., to campus stations, to a Chinese-focused radio station, focused only on women, etc., etc. So all these different types of community radio stations, in order for there to be something for you within your community also that you can listen to. So yes, lots of challenges for community radio, but they also have a lot of good going for them. Also, this is where the groundwork happens for presenters, producers, etc. People who do not go study necessarily. This is where they gain their knowledge in order for them to try and get a foothold within the commercial sphere. Okay. Okay, so I've just shown you the RAM figures. Just briefly then about visual radio. So as much as we're doing audiovisual media, this is based on radio. Last semester you did TV. So visual radio, first and foremost, a form of radio. The main idea behind it is to preserve the leading role of the radio program. So storytelling. Okay, we still want to have that sense of we are telling you a story. Why? Because since the day you were born, people started telling you stories. And it never stops. Every single day, you spend about 60% of your day telling people stories. So we want to keep that. So the result is video of what is happening in studio that's streamed in parallel with the audio, with most of the processes being completely automated, but also it's changing now into a little bit more of almost like TV. So in between, while songs are playing and people are just sitting being boring, they're showcasing other stuff, other reels and things in between, going back and forward. So there's a lot more from a TV production element that's also coming in to visual radio now. And you can already see some of these formats in quite a few of the USA radio stations. So radio stations are gaining visibility, the talent gains additional exposure, and radio becomes more of a two-way experience for listeners/viewers. Co-owned TV stations often do break-in interview segments with their partner radio stations as a form of cross-promotion. Like you would know that SABC 1 and Metro did with the DJ live producing, and then it links back to the studio with the presenter, and then it links to the presenter on SABC 1, and back and forth and back and forth. So that is like the co-owned TV stations, right? And they've been doing that for years and years. It's not a new thing. So we've already gone into the visual radio/TV element, even though it's only really becoming bigger now. It's already been there for a while, okay? So when we look at visual radio, there are radio visualization configurations, and there are three main visualization configurations. Firstly, it's called minimal. So only images captured by cameras installed in the studio. So, just that. Then you have optimal, which is images from a camera plus other graphics that's been put in. And then you get full. Ooh, welcome back, Jessica.
Sorry about that.
That's fine. So like I was saying, so three types of visual radio configurations: minimal, optimal, and full. Minimal, just what I'm capturing by cameras installed in studio. So that's what majority of our radio stations have. It's these cameras in studio that'll live stream whoever is singing in studio. Optimal has images from cameras along with other graphics, and then full includes all the possibilities of visualization. So images from camera in the studio with graphics, with original videos produced by the station, all incorporated into one. So imagine kind of like reels. I think that's the best way to explain it to you, is there's this reel that's made out of video and graphics and photos and pieces of what I've recorded in studio. So making the decision to add video to a radio station's signals should be carefully thought out, though, because it has to look professional in every aspect. Otherwise, people won't take you seriously. Okay, so presentation is really important. It's much easier to just go with minimal than it is to go with optimal and full. So we're kind of sitting with this at the moment. But that's just to give you this idea in your head of what visual radio is at the end of the day. Okay, podcasting, again, you can have it in all three of these depending on what it is you're looking at. Okay, so I'm going to stop the class here for today, seeing as it's 7:45 already, and I've only gone through one lesson with you, but I know for a fact that the third lesson won't be as long. So next week I'll be able to make up for this. Today, at least I know, well, I hope that you have a broad understanding, which it's really important that you have a broad understanding of this before we move on to the other countries. Because what we're going to do then next week is we're going to look at the different radio landscapes. So comparing 5 different radio landscapes across the world. And then we're going to look at the differences between FM and AM, you now know, but DAB, satellite radio, and what am I forgetting? Streaming versus online radio. Okay, so that's what we're going to be doing next. What I would like for you to do, obviously, Danae, you work at a radio station, so you will be listening to radio, but I want you to listen also, if you can, to a community radio station and a public broadcaster. What I want you to try to do is to hear if you can differentiate between the different stations. Okay, obviously not talk versus music, music versus music radio stations. So different types of music radio stations, and listen to the kind of music that they play, the ways that they speak, whether you can pick up what type of radio station it is based on what you are hearing. Okay.
Okay.
Any questions from you two?
No, I've got nothing on my side. I think yeah, I think I'm fairly okay for today.
Everything was very clear today. Yeah.
Okay, great. That's what I want to hear. Right, then I shall see you again next week, Monday, same time, same place. Enjoy your week. Have a good one. And before you go, please do me a favor and just drop me a note with your email address and cell phone number. Oh, wait, I think, no, I have it because I messaged you today. I'm tired. Never mind, you don't need to leave me anything. I shall see you next week. Have a good week. And I'm going to start chatting with you on WhatsApp if there's anything needed. Also, next week, we will go through your first assignment.
Okay. Sorry, is the WhatsApp link on Co-Campus? Because I don't think I'm in a group.
I haven't created it yet.
Oh, got you. Okay.
Okay.
I shall create it tomorrow because I only got your details today.
Oh, okay.
Okay, perfect. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Have a good
All right.
evening.
You too.
You
Bye.
too. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.